All I did was turn off the water on my property. And next thing I know, cops are surrounding me because my HOA's self-appointed enforcer called 911. You tell me, when did basic dignity become a crime? It was one of those mornings that felt like life had finally given you a quiet moment to breathe. No drama, no noise, just the calm hum of suburbia doing its thing. The sun had just climbed over the rooftops, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn I'd spent the last 2 weekends trying to tame. Birds chirped from the old oak in the backyard, lawnmowers grumbled in the distance, and somewhere nearby, a father was teaching his boy to ride a bike, his voice full of encouragement and patience. This was the kind of neighborhood we'd worked hard to earn, a modest, middle-class corner of the world where families grew roots and folks nodded hello over fences. My wife was inside humming to the radio, folding laundry with the grace of someone who never let the weight of the world get too heavy. After years of patching up pipes, watching pennies and making do, we had finally set aside enough to call in a real plumber to fix the slow but steady leak that had been quietly draining our bank account month after month. It wasn't a big job, just a worn line between the city meter and our home's foundation. But it had been left too long and we knew it was time. The plumber, a local guy named Dan who'd done work for us before, said he'd swing by around noon. Friendly, no-nonsense type, always left things better than he found them. To save him some time, I figured I'd turn off the main water valve myself. I'd done it once before with no trouble. It was on our side of the property, tucked beside the house near a bed of overgrown roses I'd been meaning to cut back. So I grabbed the old wrench from the garage, the one with the faded red handle, and the history in its rust, and made my way around the side yard. The air was warm already, thick with the scent of cut grass and spring blossoms, and I remember feeling good, like a man quietly proud of taking care of his home. I crouched down, twisted the valve shut with a firm turn, and stood up. Done. Just like that. Or so I thought. Because that simple act, turning off the water to my own house on my own land, was the exact moment when everything started to go sideways. I didn't notice her at first. She was too quiet, too calculating. But from across the street, just beyond the hedge that separated our driveway from the sidewalk, she was watching. Karen. That's what most folks called her, though never to her face. Middle-aged, always in a visor, walking her little white dog like it was royalty. She wasn't elected to anything, but she'd anointed herself queen of the HOA, judge and jury of the block. If a trash bin wasn't brought in by 6 p.m. sharp, she'd send a written warning. If someone parked the wrong way, she took pictures. Folks tolerated her mostly because it was easier than arguing, but deep down, we all knew what she was. And, as I brushed the dirt from my jeans and turned to head back inside, I heard the unmistakable sound of a phone camera shutter, followed by a voice that sliced the morning calm in half. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" At first, I thought maybe she was talking to someone else. I turned politely and said, "Just turning off my water, ma'am. Got a plumber coming in a bit." Her eyebrows shot up like I'd confessed to a felony. "You can't touch that valve. That's city property. That's tampering." I blinked, not quite sure how to respond to something so clearly wrong. "It's on my side of the meter. It's for my house. It's leaking. We're getting it fixed today." I tried to keep my voice calm, respectful, because that's how I was raised. You treat people with dignity, even when they don't offer. You the same. But she wasn't interested in facts or explanations. Her hand went up, phone still in it, and she pressed a button. "Yes, I'd like to report someone messing with the water system. He looks suspicious. Says he's shutting off. City water. Yes, right now." I stood there stunned. Suspicious? Me? For fixing a leak on my own property? In that moment, I felt something rise in my chest. Not anger exactly, but that cold, hollow feeling of being accused of something you didn't do, of being looked at like you were less than you are, like your word didn't matter, like your intentions weren't clear, and if you've ever been in a moment where your integrity, your basic decency was questioned without cause, then you know that feeling. It sticks to you. It shames you, even when you know you've done nothing wrong. If you've made it this far into the story, I just want to say thank you for being here. I share these moments because I believe in standing up for the simple values that too often get trampled: respect, fairness, dignity. If those things still mean something to you too, I hope you'll subscribe and stick around for more stories like this. We need each other in this world now more than ever. Because what happened next wasn't just frustrating, it was humiliating. And it all started when 2 police cruisers pulled into my driveway, sirens off but lights flashing, and a young officer stepped out with his hand resting lightly on his holster, looking at me like I was the one causing trouble in my own front. Yud. I hadn't even made it 3 steps toward the house when I heard that sharp, deliberate click, the kind of sound a phone makes when someone wants you to know they're recording. I turned, and there she was, Karen, standing stiff as a flagpole. White dog tucked under one arm like a purse, phone in the other. Her mouth pulled into that twisted, sour look that made it clear she'd already judged and sentenced me. She was wearing that visor she always wore, the one that seemed permanently attached to her forehead like a badge of authority. And the second our eyes met, I knew something was coming. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, voice loud enough to turn heads 3 houses down. "You can't tamper with public utilities." I blinked, confused by the sudden confrontation, and instinctively stepped back. I didn't want trouble. I never do. I was raised to avoid conflict if you can, to handle things with calm and reason. So I said as evenly as I could, "It's just my water, ma'am. I've got a plumber coming, just getting it shut off so he can work on the line." She took a few exaggerated steps closer, her little dog yipping like a squeaky toy with a vengeance, and pointed her phone at me like it was a weapon. "That valve is city property," she snapped, her voice climbing in volume. "This is a violation of HOA rules. You can't just do whatever you want." Now let me be clear. I wasn't on public property. The valve was on my side of the SUF line, just a couple feet past the meter, nestled beside the roses and under a small cover I'd installed myself after the last leak. I tried to explain that, even pulled out my phone to show her the text from my plumber confirming the repair and the time. But she wasn't interested in facts. She didn't care about logic. What she wanted was control. I could see it in her eyes. That hunger some people get when they think they've caught someone, when they believe they're the only thing standing between order and chaos. And me? I was chaos, apparently, just for taking care of my own home. "I'm calling the authorities," she said with a sort of smugness that made my stomach turn. "This is highly suspicious behavior." And right there, right in front of me, she dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a man tampering with the water system," she said into the phone, her voice clear and full of phony concern. "He's acting suspicious, possibly trying to interfere with utilities. He's near the meter right now." I felt my mouth go dry. I looked down at the wrench still in my hand, an old, familiar tool, something simple and honest, and suddenly it felt like a symbol of something dangerous, something criminal. I stood still, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't yelling, or trespassing, or hurting anyone. I was fixing my home, providing for my family, handling a leak that had already drained our budget far too long. And yet here I was, being cast as a threat, an intruder, because one woman decided I didn't look like I belonged. It was surreal, like the world had tilted just enough to make everything feel off balance. As she hung up and stood there like a guard at the gate, I tried one last time, calmly, respectfully, to de-escalate. "Karen," I said, "there's no need to call the cops. I'm just doing a repair. I can show you the invoice. I can even call the plumber right now." But she waved me off like I was a bug she couldn't be bothered to flick. "You've got no right to touch that line. You people think you can just do anything." You people. That phrase hit like a slap. I'm not a confrontational man. I never have been. I've spent my whole life trying to do the right thing, be a good neighbor, a steady husband, an honest worker. But those 2 words dug in deeper than anything else she'd said. It wasn't just about water anymore. It wasn't about valves or pipes or HOA rules. It was about power. It was about the quiet, ugly way some folks weaponize their fear, their entitlement, their need to feel in control. And as I stood there, 58 years old, calloused hands, knees still sore from last week's landscaping job. I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to threaten. But I also wasn't going to let this woman strip me of my dignity, not without a fight. So I stood there, calmly, wrench still in hand, and waited. Because now there was nothing more I could do. The phone call had been made, the label suspicious had been applied, and I knew, deep in my bones, I'd have to defend myself not just from her accusations, but from the way they'd be received. That's the part people don't talk about enough. The moment your integrity is questioned without cause, and the burden of proof lands on you, not the person pointing the finger. I kept thinking about my wife inside, folding laundry, humming like everything was still okay. I didn't want her to see me like this, to walk outside and find her husband being treated like a trespasser on his own land. And I kept thinking about all the times I'd stayed quiet, stayed polite, hoping that decency would win out. But decency doesn't always win, especially not when it's up against people who don't care about what's right, only what gives them a sense of control. I heard the sirens before I saw the cars. No lights, just the low whoop of a cruiser pulling up slow, steady, like a predator circling prey. My heart was thudding, but I didn't move. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just stood there, hoping reason would prevail. And when two officers stepped out and walked toward me, one resting his hand lightly on his holster, the other scanning the yard like I'd buried something beneath the azaleas, I realized something I'll never forget. To them, in that moment, I wasn't a neighbor. I wasn't a homeowner. I wasn't even a man fixing a leaky pipe. I was a call, a problem, a potential threat. And no matter how calm I spoke, no matter how much proof I had, I knew there was a chance, however small, that this could end very, very badly. Because all it takes is one false assumption, one moment of fear, and everything you've worked for, your home, your freedom, your peace, can be taken from you in an instant. The flashing lights painted the side of my house red and blue, casting shadows that didn't belong on a quiet Saturday morning in a neighborhood where the worst offense usually involved a barking dog or a missed trash pickup. I stood there on my own lawn, wrench still in my hand, as two police cruisers idled in my driveway like war horses waiting for battle. The officers stepped out with practiced caution, hands hovering near their holsters, their eyes scanning me with that wary expression that says they've seen this kind of situation spiral fast. I raised my hands slightly, palms open, peaceful, and spoke as respectfully as I could. Officers, I'm the homeowner. I shut off my own water to prepare for a scheduled plumbing repair. I have the estimate and texts from the plumber if you'd like to see them. One nodded. The other stayed quiet, eyes flicking to the wrench, to my hands, to the valve now sealed off beside the flower bed. I handed over my ID, unlocked my phone to show them the plumber's name and number, even scrolled to the message that read, "Be there around noon. Turn off water ahead of time." They didn't say much, just took it in, radioed something back to dispatch, and stepped aside to confer. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen stood like a statue, arms folded across her chest, chin raised as if she'd just performed a noble act of civic duty. Her dog was still yapping, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on me, on proving that she was right, and I was wrong. That she was the savior of the subdivision, and I was the intruder. The absurdity of it all began to sink in. Here, I was, a grown man, standing on land I'd worked to own for nearly 20 years, being interrogated for using a wrench to turn off a valve that I paid the city to supply. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. Not fear exactly, but a deep, cold frustration. Like dignity itself had been stolen from me in plain sight, and no one could, or would, give it back. One officer finally returned and gave a tight nod. "You're not doing anything wrong, sir. That valve is clearly on your property, just doing maintenance. We're not here to escalate anything." He tried to offer a small smile, but it felt like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Before I could thank him, Karen raised her voice from across the street. "Excuse me, officers, I have video evidence," she shouted, waving her phone like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom drama. He was tampering with the HOA's water system. That valve controls multiple homes. My jaw tightened. It was a blatant lie, and she had to know it. But the louder she spoke, the more she convinced herself, and maybe others, that it was true. One of the officers gave me a weary look, then sighed and walked across the street to talk to her. The other stayed near me, lowering his voice as he said, "Sir, look, I believe you. But this kind of thing happens more than you'd think in HOA neighborhoods. Folks get territorial. They see someone doing something they don't understand and assume the worst. Then we get called in, and we have to respond." I nodded, appreciating his honesty, but it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. Because it wasn't just about confusion. It was about control, about one neighbor weaponizing a broken sense of power to drag me through a humiliating display in front of my entire block. The officer added, "You've got nothing to worry about legally. But sometimes it's not about the law. It's about perception. And once these HOA types get a story in their head, it's hard to change." That's when I saw Karen pacing now, still yelling, still filming, still pushing her narrative as if reality had no say in the matter. "He threatened me," she suddenly said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "He got aggressive when I told him to stop." My heart stopped. That word, threatened, hit harder than a fist. Because in today's world, that word carries weight. It shifts the entire tone of a police interaction. It doesn't matter what I actually did. All it takes is her saying it loud enough, often enough, and suddenly I'm the one with something to prove. I couldn't believe it. I had kept calm, stayed respectful, and now I was being accused of aggression for holding a wrench on my own property. The officer beside me stiffened slightly, his eyes darting to his partner across the street. "She said what?" he asked. I repeated her words, my voice shaking now, not with fear, but with disbelief. "She just told the whole street I threatened her." He rubbed the back of his neck, visibly annoyed, and keyed into his radio to update his partner. Meanwhile, neighbors had started to emerge. Curious eyes peeked through blinds. 2 lawn chairs popped up down the block. Someone even started filming from their porch. I felt stripped bare. It wasn't just a plumbing job anymore. It was a public trial, and I was the defendant, guilty until proven innocent. The other officer came back a few minutes later, his face unreadable. "We're clearing the call," he said. "No crime has occurred. But she's insistent that the HOA will be following up." I asked, "Do I need to do anything?" He shook his head. "Not legally, but just be aware she's trying to escalate this." Said she's forwarding the video to the HOA board and pushing for a violation. My wife had come outside by then, towel in hand, eyes wide with concern. She hadn't heard all of it, just enough to know something was wrong. I saw the way her eyes scanned the squad cars, then flicked to Karen, who was still filming. The look on her face, the worry, the shame, the helplessness, it broke something in me. Not because I couldn't handle it, but because she had to see it. She had to watch her husband be treated like a criminal for the sin of fixing a leak. And there was nothing I could do to shield her from it. Nothing at all. As the cruisers finally pulled away, their tires crunching against the gravel, I felt the silence wrap around me like a weight. Karen had retreated inside, probably drafting her next email to the board. My wife came over and put her hand on my arm, but I could see the question in her eyes, the one that asked, "How did it come to this?" And I didn't have an answer. All I could say was, "I just turned off a valve." But the truth was, this was never about plumbing. It was about power, about pride, about the quiet war being waged in neighborhoods across the country, where good men who've worked hard their whole lives are made to feel like intruders in the very places they've built with their hands. That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA's compliance officer. It was short, cold, a formal notice of a potential violation for interference with shared infrastructure. They requested a written explanation within 10 days. I stared at the screen, jaw clenched as the last line burned into my eyes like an accusation. Further incidents may result in legal action or fines. The plumber pulled into my driveway with his usual easy smile, but his brows lifted when he saw the 2 squad cars reversing out. I waved him in, forced a smile of my own, and told him we'd talk later. We got the job done quickly. The leak, sealed, the new pipe fitted without any problems, but I was somewhere else the whole time. Even as we shook hands and he left, my mind churned with something deeper than frustration. It was a feeling I couldn't quite name, something between anger and shame, because I kept thinking about the look on the officers' faces when they first arrived, scanning me like I might be dangerous, just because of a neighbor's twisted version of the truth. I'd played it cool, kept my voice calm, but it haunted me. That one false word, one exaggerated claim could have turned the entire day into something much darker. I thought about my wife's face, the fear in her eyes, the silent question I saw in her expression. How could something so small lead to something so ugly? And I thought about my father, a man who always taught me that if you want to keep your dignity, you better be ready to stand up for it even when no one else will. So that night, while the neighborhood lights dimmed and the world settled into its Saturday quiet, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a printout of our HOA bylaws I pulled from the dusty community website. I read through them line by line, legal jargon and all, until I found it. Section 4, Paragraph D. Individual residential water valves located within property boundaries shall be the sole responsibility and right of the homeowner to access and maintain. There it was, in plain ink. Karen had no leg to stand on. I printed 3 copies, highlighted the line, stapled it to a copy of the police incident report, and wrote a calm, professional letter to the HOA board. I didn't use big words. I didn't rant. I just laid out the facts. I followed every rule. I committed no violation. I was publicly harassed, falsely accused, and subjected to the stress of a police visit without cause. Then I added something else, something I wasn't sure they'd expect. I asked that Karen receive a formal warning for her behavior, not out of spite, but because what she did wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. Misusing emergency services, especially to settle personal grudges, puts real people at risk. It disrespects the police, it wastes resources, and it chips away at the trust that keeps neighborhoods functional. I hit send on the email, copied a physical version into an envelope, and dropped it in the HOA mailbox first thing Sunday morning. I didn't expect an immediate reply. HOAs move slower than molasses in winter, but I figured I'd done my part. What happened next, though, caught me completely off guard. Monday afternoon, I got a knock at the door. It wasn't the police. This time, it was Mike, one of my neighbors 2 streets over. I'd seen him around but never spoken more than a polite wave. He had a firm look on his face and said, "Hey, I heard what happened with Karen. Just wanted you to know, you're not alone." I was taken aback. He went on to tell me that she'd once called the police on his teenage son for having a Bluetooth speaker too loud during a backyard barbecue. Another neighbor, Jenny, was cited by the HOA after Karen claimed she'd painted her shutters a shade too dark. Turns out, there was a small but growing group of residents who'd had run-ins with her and were fed up. Mike said, "We've been talking about doing something, but no one wanted to be the first to step forward. What you did with the complaint? That lit the spark." That same day, I received an email from a board member, an older gentleman named Mr. Whitaker, thanking me for providing documentation and expressing concern about Karen's pattern of behavior. He said the board would be reviewing her actions and would respond formally within the week. I felt something shift in me then, something subtle but powerful. It was more than relief. It was the first breath of fresh air after being stifled by months, maybe years, of walking on eggshells in a community that had slowly become more about rules than neighbors. That night, I met with 3 other homeowners, folks who'd never really had a reason to speak before, and we talked for hours. We shared stories, not just about Karen, but about how the HOA had become less about protecting our homes and more about controlling them. We weren't looking to break rules. We just wanted common sense, fairness, and the freedom to live with dignity. There was a real fire building in those conversations. Men and women who'd worked their entire lives to afford a peaceful retirement, now uniting around something simple: the right to be respected in their own homes. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from the HOA. They were convening an emergency meeting to discuss recent incidents of neighborly harassment and inappropriate 911 calls. And my simple letter backed by facts, was listed on the agenda. As I stared at that message, a thought occurred to me, clear as day. This isn't just about me anymore. Something bigger was beginning to take shape, and the people who'd been silent were finally ready to speak. 2 weeks passed like a slow exhale after holding your breath for too long, and then finally it came. A crisp, white envelope from the HOA board slipped into my mailbox, heavier than it looked. I sat down at the kitchen table where this whole mess had begun, peeled it open, and read the words I'd been waiting for. Karen had received an official written warning. Not a slap on the wrist, not a vague reminder, but a clear, documented acknowledgement that her behavior was out of line. The letter stated, in no uncertain terms, that emergency services were never to be weaponized for personal vendettas, and that HOA members were expected to engage neighbors with respect, not hostility or public spectacle. They even noted they were beginning a full review of bylaws to eliminate the kind of ambiguity that had allowed someone like her to twist rules to suit her own warped sense of control. I can't lie. I felt a quiet surge of something like justice, not the movie kind with courtroom speeches or dramatic music, but the slow-burning kind, the one that grows in the gut when truth is finally acknowledged. And yet, as satisfying as the letter was, what came after meant even more. Over the next few days, something changed on our street, not visibly, but in the way people looked at me, in how they nodded a little deeper when we passed each other. Bob from 3 houses down stopped his mower to shake my hand. I saw the police that day, he said, and I knew it had to be her. I'm glad you didn't let it go. An older woman named Ruth, who'd lived there since the neighborhood was built, came over with a Tupperware of lemon bars and told me how Karen once tried to write her up for planting lavender instead of the approved shrubs. One after another, the stories trickled in. Small humiliations, false warnings, letters left on doorsteps, angry phone calls to the board, all from the same woman who believed she was the gatekeeper of suburban perfection. And all of these, neighbors, good people who had worked their whole lives for a little peace and quiet in their golden years, had just taken it on the chin, because pushing back against someone like Karen felt exhausting, maybe even a little dangerous. But now, because I turned off my water and didn't back down when she tried to make me feel like a criminal, a few folks started remembering what it felt like to speak up. It wasn't that I'd done something heroic. I didn't give a fiery speech or organize a movement. I just drew a line, clearly and calmly, and refused to be pushed off my own property by someone else's sense of entitlement. And that was enough. Funny how these moments start. 1 minute you're adjusting a wrench under a summer sun, thinking about a leaky pipe, and the next you're staring down flashing lights and being questioned like a suspect. But the real story wasn't about plumbing. It was about boundaries, not just physical ones, but the ones we carry in our hearts. The lines that say, this is who I am. This is where I live. This is what I will not tolerate. And maybe that's what Karen hated most. Not the water valve, not the HOA rules, but the quiet strength of someone who wouldn't be rattled by her noise. We didn't become best friends after that. She stopped walking her dog past our house. Her glares got colder, but she got quieter, and that was good enough. As for me, I kept going, cut my grass, waved to neighbors, went back to living like a man should be able to live in his own home, in peace, without fear, without having to look over his shoulder every time he turns a wrench or fixes a fence. And now when something comes up, when someone shares a story of overreach or nonsense from a rule gone too far, they come to me, not because I'm special, but because I stood up, and that gave them permission to do the same. There's something deeply American about that, I think. Not the shouting or the outrage, but the principle. The idea that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. That you don't have to raise your voice to be heard. That the best kind of strength is the kind that stays calm when someone else is trying to tear you down. I learned a lot from Karen. More than I wanted to, honestly. I learned how easily rules can be twisted. I learned how quickly suspicion can be cast. But I also learned how powerful it is to stand quietly in the truth, even when no one else seems to see it at first. So if you ever find yourself in a moment like mine, with someone yelling, with authority being abused, with your back against the wall on your own property, just remember this. You don't need to fight fire with fire. You just need to know where your line is and make sure you don't let anyone cross it. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a man can do is simply refuse to be moved. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this. Never let someone's noise drown out your truth. You've earned your peace, your home, your dignity, and nobody, not even a self-appointed HOA queen, has the right to strip that away. Sometimes the most powerful stand you can take is a calm one. Stand your ground, know your rights, and never let fear rewrite your story. If this hit home for you, if you've ever felt wronged, unheard, or underestimated, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more real stories that speak to your values. Drop a like if you believe every man has a right to respect on his own land, and leave a comment with these 3 words if you've ever had to deal with someone like this. Not your valve. Because that one moment, that wrench in my hand, and her calling 911, was about way more than plumbing. It was about dignity. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.